What's going on, everybody? It's Eric from Panola here at panola.edu, where we cover courses such as cybersecurity, networking, and intro to digital forensics. Definitely check it out, panola.edu. There's something for everybody there, and our courses are online. But in this one, we're going to continue our trek through Security Plus by looking at it objective by objective. And this objective is objective 2.6, where we explain the security implications of embedded and specialized systems. Now, this is coming from chapter 11 inside of our CompTIA Security Plus study guide, which we're using along with our courses here at Panola in Cybersecurity. ISBN's on the right side of the screen, so that way you can get a copy if you want. And in this one, we're going to be focusing on those endpoints and their protections. Now, we're going to be going through a couple of the kind of top, I don't want to say top 10, but just the classics. We're going to be running through the classics on this one. And we're going to try to do this in a very quick manner because we're only going to be hitting the high points here. See, for more detailed information and more practice, join us at panola.edu. So the first one that we have is signature-based detection, where those endpoint systems like IDS or IPS, we talked about this earlier in the previous objectives, they have to have rules in place in order to know what to detect, right? Well, signature-based detection does this usually by hashes. And we take a list of known hashes of known files and say, if this hash meets this, what do we do with it? Well, we can either whitelist it or blacklist it, which is basically allow or deny. And if we see a hash of something that we know that's bad, we definitely either report or kick it out. And that's where the hashing comes into play at. Then we have heuristic. I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly. Heuristic, which is behavior-based detection. So if something's looking like it's acting up, it takes this IDS or IPS will take a look at the software's actions. If it's trying to dive into a known system file, then it's like, whoa, stop that. Don't do that. And then it'll take action based on that. It's not necessarily based on hashes or any signature based. It's just based on what the actual application is doing. And then by their powers combined, they create AI or machine learning detection, which is a fancy way of saying it's applying heuristic and signature-based detection in a blended environment. So if you hear AI or machine learning detection, that's what we're talking about here. Then we have application control. This is less to do with files going across the wire being transferred across the system, and that's just going to the individual systems themselves, either through policy or individually on the system, and saying, is this application allowed to be ran or not? And where this might come into play at is, let's say we have a workstation here that manages the domain, and we have some of the Windows Active Directory control programs on this system. I don't want regular users mucking around in the actual domain, so I go through application control, like App Locker, and make it to where certain folks with certain permissions have access into those programs, else dump them. And then we have data loss prevention. Now, why are we tying this inside of protecting our endpoints? Well, because we want to make sure that we maintain all of our data, and everything that we've been doing up to this point for security altogether in our enterprise environment has been making sure that we maintain our data integrity. Now, we've talked about the CIA triad, we've talked about endpoint security, but in this one in particular, we're just taking a look at what can we do to protect the data from being lost. What more can we add to the organization in their security platform to ensure that the data is available to all the users? And as we go through this, keep that in mind that that's how all this ties into data loss prevention. We also have next generation firewalls, or NGFW, which is a device that is, this is a fancy way of saying it's a device that blends together IDS, IPS features with the previous rules that we've already mentioned, from like heuristic, AI, machine learning, application control. Plus, we're adding in the antivirus and anti-malware features to bring it all inside of one nice little package for our domain on the network level or on the individual system level. Now, as we start getting into more of the individual system, one of the things that we want to take a look at is service hardening. Now, what am I talking about with services? Well, I'm talking about services that run in the background. For instance, let's say we have on our Windows Active Directory domain controller, the Kerberos service, or the Active Directory group policy service, or something along those lines. And then we want to make sure that we limit who can control that service, who can make modifications to that service, everything that's running behind the scenes that builds that operating system together, who has permissions to be able to go through and do stuff like that. And this is where also we have to know our common ports and protocols. Now, Security Plus, the exam itself, will ask questions concerning ports and protocols. We're not going to be covering those here, but this is definitely something that you should look up, or if it is something that we should cover here, leave a comment below and we'll go over the common ports and protocols. Now, as we begin to harden that network and that operating system, we can't forget the individual machine, which is why I just mentioned operating system. This is usually done through the local and group security policy, locking down the registry, enforcing file permissions, folder access, etc., etc. And system naming standards. You may not realize it, but naming a system and having a standardization of names for systems helps in making sure that we are doing data loss protection and protecting those endpoints. Because if we have a naming convention for our systems that come on the network and are joined to the domain in whichever way, guess what? If a system pops up that's not in that naming convention, it's suspect and probably needs to be looked at a little bit deeper. Well, what do we do with all of the disks that we have in storage that we no longer need or no longer use that may or may not have data on them? Well, that's sanitation. And that there will be a time in your practice as an organization and as a security practitioner where you will have boxes of hard drives or thumbsticks or anything along those lines that just no longer needed. They could be too small. They could be form factor problems. We've upgraded to solid state drives and we've gotten rid of all the regular old school spin drives. Well, as security practitioners, we need to keep in mind that we have to wipe the data off of them. And there are many different programs out there that you could use to be able to wipe that data off. But I find it best that total destruction of the disk is probably one of the best ways to be able to prevent somebody like me in digital forensics land from going and recovering data from that old disk that's no longer needed. All right, we're starting to wrap this module up, and we are going to apply everything that we're doing here to that new wave of bring your own device policies. I'm looking at you, tablets and mobile devices, because everything that we've been doing, such as naming convention, endpoint protection, data loss prevention, and all that other great stuff, comes into play when we have an organization now in this day and age where we start seeing more and more tablets, mobile devices, and personally owned devices on our network. So we have to make sure that our policies within the organization regulate that device usage to make sure that they're not inadvertently bringing something nasty onto our network or inadvertently creating another access point to where people can pivot in and do things that they aren't supposed to be doing. But going back to the operating system, you may notice that you can boot from different things. Well, we need to make sure that we have boot integrity, and this is making sure that the system, like this one, boots off the hard drive that the operating system is installed on. You may be thinking to yourself, well, that's weird. It needs to boot into an operating system. Otherwise, it's not going to be able to function, right? You are kind of right. Because you could take a thumbstick, something as simple as this right here, and install Ubuntu on this thumbstick right here and boot from the thumbstick. And we can prevent stuff like this by ensuring boot integrity, which is where we go into the BIOS and make sure that we disable all other boot possibilities except for the one that we want to boot from the disk or wherever it's defined at and stuff like that for your organization and policy. BIOS, you say? Yeah, it's been taken over by the Unified Extensible Firmware Interface, UEFI, which is the new BIOS. And it lets us do things like enable secure boot, where we can actually add a certificate or signature to that hard drive and ensure that's the one that we actually want to boot off of. We go even further with motherboards starting to come out with TPMs installed on them, which is trusted platform module chips that are basically a hardware solution for a physical key to allow encryption on the actual drive itself. And this is more familiar in things like BitLocker or Apple Silicon. Now, we covered this and much, much more at panola.edu in our cybersecurity program, networking or digital forensics. If you like this, go ahead and like and subscribe. Leave a comment below. Let me know if I can make any improvements or if there's something else you want me to cover in the future or anything like that. I hope you really like this one, and I will see you in the next.